Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about the books I have recently finished reading. I'm going to be talking about 3 fiction books that I read in October. And if you're new to my channel, all of my videos are unscripted, they're informal, and I don't really call these reviews, these are more book discussions. So, yeah, you're going to get a very unedited, very probably meandering video when I discuss these things. But I just kind of do them to keep a record for the thoughts that I had while reading them. And if you've read any of these, I also love to hear what you think of them. So I'm going to start off with the longer book, which I also listened to as an audiobook. And I'm glad I did because it was excellently read. And this is Stephen King's Different Seasons. First published, let me just check the date on this. Yeah, 1982. I've been kind of doing a Stephen King project, which I'm off and on the wagon again with that sometimes. But I'm essentially reading all of his works in publishing order, at least the ones that I own. And you can see the shelf back here of a bunch of them there. So if I own it, I'm just kind of going in that publishing order. I don't have a set schedule. It's not exactly every month. Lately it's been, I think I only read 2 of them so far this year for 2025. So I'm going to try and up that a little bit more. I've got Christine, I think, on the docket next. And hopefully if I don't read that before the end of the year, it might be something I read very early on in January in 2026. But that's what I read as part of this. And I also read this as kind of a personal challenge because this had been on my list to read for so long. This and there were 4 other books that I vowed to read within 3 months. And this was one of them. So I'm really glad I got through it. And yeah, this was excellent, I think. It's basically 4 novellas as part of this collection. Most of these are very famous because of their cinematic iterations. So the first one, you've got Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, which of course everybody knows The Shawshank Redemption. Excellent movie, and really an excellent short story. This is taken from, I think, is it Red's point of view? I'm trying to remember the actual character who knows Andy Dufresne. But it's taken from his perspective, and there are changes that they made inside the movie. But overall, I thought it was really well written. It captures this sort of desperate prison life. You get a really vivid idea of who Andy Dufresne is, and just a kind of really great story arc there. The second one, which I saw the movie version of when it came out, I think in the 90s. I haven't seen it since, but I remember liking it overall back then. But it's Apt Pupil, which I was surprised to find was like one of the really longer ones in here. So Apt Pupil, you essentially have a young man, or boy, I guess you could say, he's like a teen, who realizes that an old man in the neighborhood is actually a Nazi war criminal. And rather than turning him in, he basically wants to learn as much as he can from this Nazi war criminal because he's fascinated by the Holocaust. And their relationship over time gets more sort of manipulative and destructive, and they both go down this kind of dark spiral of murder and cruelty. And overall, I thought it was pretty good. I thought that they both kind of end up becoming murderous on like independently, and choosing basically the same victims, which I thought was, I kind of wish that there was a little more variation there. But overall, I thought that it was pretty good. Definitely not my favorite of the collection, but I did like it quite a bit. And then you have The Body, which became Stand By Me. And just a classic film from the 1980s about a group of 4 boys, 4 friends in the early 1960s, I think this is, who go on a journey to go find a dead body before the authorities can find it. Their kind of morbid curiosity has gotten the best of them. But along the way, they're dealing with their own personal troubles. They're dealing with ideas of morality. And it is just really, really well written. I think that King really excels at character work, and especially in things like this. Each of those boys feel so distinct. They feel so real on the page. And it just reminded me of, the years when I was younger and how far I would roam. This is back, in the 90s. We live in a small, big town. It's sort of a small town, but it's big as far as area-wise, and there's lots of kind of, a lot of trouble you could get into. I wasn't much of a troublemaker, but we would wander all around town, even in the middle of the night. We'd sleep over a friend's house, and the cops would see us walking around at like midnight, 1 in the morning, and they just kind of stop and see if we were okay. And I'm like, yeah, and then we just kind of keep on walking around town. But it reminded me of all the wandering that I did, and camping out and things like that. So that was really good. I was really impressed with that story and how well it was written. There's 2 stories within a story in that. The first one was unnecessary. The second one is certainly a lot more fun. If you've seen the movie, you know what that second story is. And then the last one was The Breathing Method. I think maybe the shortest one out of all of them. And that one's also almost like a story within a story. There is a really interesting setup to this whole thing, where there's this kind of Manhattan, I think he's a businessman. I don't remember exactly what his job was, because I read this about a month ago now. But he's invited by his boss to this sort of like exclusive club in Manhattan. And they tell stories. They tell, sometimes funny stories, but it seems like, again, this kind of actually... This relates to one of the events that I just made an announcement video for, Ghosts of Christmas Past. Around the Christmas holiday, they like to tell spooky stories and dark stories. And the whole setup of what this club is and what's there and who the guy is that runs it, that was really intriguing. And I kind of wish that there was, if there is more to that in other books, because I know Stephen King kind of has a shared universe, you can let me know, because I was really fascinated by that. But one of them ends up telling the story that they call The Breathing Method. And it has to do with a woman who's pregnant and ready to give birth. And there's this kind of crazy ending to that story that I won't give away. And even though it's a weird story, I thought it was really well written, even if the story itself is really bizarre. But that whole setup in this kind of club where these guys talk and exactly what's going on there, and this library that has books that don't seem to exist anywhere else. All of that I thought was really intriguing. That really drew me in. So yeah, out of all the Stephen King books that I've read so far, this might be at the top. This is definitely among my favorites so far. I like this one a lot. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, glad I read this. It makes me excited to read Christine. Hopefully I won't take too long to get to that. The other 2 books I read, 2 fiction books, are very short, a lot shorter. That's why I was able to get through them. I think, I read this one. And this is also one of the books The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is one of the ones that I had pledged to read, that had been sitting on my shelf for years, literally, that I wanted to read within 3 months, and I got to this one too. A short book, originally written in French, and I think published 1942, around there, during the German occupation of France, which is significant. And this is like a companion piece to his work, The Myth of Sisyphus, which I had read a few years ago. And it's kind of like a philosophical exploration of the absurd, that the universe has no meaning. So you could either kind of despair and, wallow in that, and maybe, who knows, maybe it's too much for you to bear, or you can essentially meet the universe and make your own meaning. Continue on anyway. So it's kind of absurd life, absurd hero, that we see in The Myth of Sisyphus. We see that here. And we have a main character. It's told from his point of view. And this is definitely kind of a strange novel. He is somebody who he's French, but he's living in Algeria. And that ends up being kind of significant. I think it serves as sort of a companion piece to this. Unexpectedly, there's a certain connection here with this book. But you have, he's living among an Arab population, but the Arabs are largely nameless. They're entirely nameless. They're barely even noticed by the French that are there. So I think that, I don't know if Camus intended that to mean something, but it certainly meant something to me as I was reading it. But essentially, he is a character who is disattached emotionally. He's apathetic. He just doesn't really care. He doesn't really see meaning behind, or the need for anything. He just sort of exists. And he ends up getting caught up, like in the very beginning, his mother's dead, and he doesn't really mourn. He doesn't really show an emotional connection to the whole thing. He's eventually caught up in a murder on a beach of an Arab, and a nameless Arab. And he's put on trial, but the trial ends up being not so much about his murder of this man. It ends up being more about him not sufficiently mourning his mother. So it sort of gets more absurd and weird as it goes. Uh, and I thought this was actually, it was interesting. I think it's something I might have to read again to really end up appreciating. I'm sure there's a lot more nuance in here. This translator, he talks about the writing here. So there's very kind of like short to the point sentences. And he says that Camus was inspired by like Hemingway and that kind of American writing style of the early 20th century. And I can sort of see that. And that does kind of drift a little bit and get a little more descriptive as the book goes on. But, he says that this translation is more appropriate because it captures that sort of essence. And yeah, I liked it overall. It's weird. It's just kind of a strange novel. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect going into it. But yeah, it's probably something I'll check out again at a future time just to kind of see if I can get even more out of it. So after all that, the last fiction book that I read was this. At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. So this is written in French, but it's written by, I don't know, I'm assuming that the author himself is Senegalese. I didn't really look into him. But so this is translated from French into English, although the way that it's written, I think that, and again, this is without me knowing for sure, I think that we see a lot of Senegalese, maybe storytelling techniques in here. The character says certain phrases quite often, almost ritualistically. Things like, God's truth, or, I know, I understand, or variations of that. He repeats these things over and over again. And the way that things are told, I have to wonder if there's a lot of inspiration from African storytelling. But essentially, we have a main character in World War I, and he's from Senegal, but he's fighting in France in the trenches. And in the very beginning, he basically watches his best friend die. His best friend has been disemboweled, and his best friend is begging him to kill him, but he can't bring himself to kill his friend. And he has regrets over this, and he kind of goes down this downward spiral of violence and despair, and over time, he's sort of losing his identity. So we have, this dual sort of pressure on him, not just the dehumanizing nature of war, which is prominent, but also you have the dehumanizing nature of colonization. The way that the French kind of talked to him in his past, what it was like for him growing up. All of that has this effect where as the story goes on, he's getting kind of more and more fractured till, I'm trying not to give too many spoilers, but essentially you're seeing somebody who is losing their identity. They're losing their humanity. They're not even aware of really who they are after a certain period. So, and I'd said that this kind of connected with this because we have French immigrants among North African population, and they barely notice them. Don't even give them a name even after they murder them. And here we have an African who is, basically under the colonial yoke of the French, and we see that dehumanizing and its consequences. So, yeah, this is a very quick read. Both of these are less than 200 pages, but even a lot of this, these pages they don't take that long to read. But yeah, two kind of very unique, interesting books. In both cases, we sort of see logic and reason and reality start splintering in their own ways. So they ended up actually being pretty interesting companion pieces. But yeah, that's what I read for fiction in October, which for me, 3 fiction books in 1 month, that's actually a lot. And those are my thoughts. So if you've read any of these, love your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.